Okay, Bruchim Abam, welcome everyone. So we usually have our shir on Wednesday evenings. This week it's Thursday night, but actually Hashgacha has it that the shir is being given Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshat Chukat, because as we're going to see, there's actually a very significant calendar date, Erev Shabbos Kodesh Parshat Chukat. The Paraduma is the quintessential mysterious mitzvah, the quintessential chayk. The paradoxical nature of the Paraduma is something that baffled the wisest of men. Even Shlomo HaMelech thought he could understand the Paraduma. He says, Amarti echkama, I thought I was wise, but v'hi rechayka mimeni. But the reality is, it's even beyond me. And the simple explanation was the paradoxical nature of the Paraduma, that it's metaher es hatmeim umetame es hatahirim. That somebody who is tamei meis, the being sprinkled with the ashes of the Paraduma renders them tahar. But somebody who is tahar, when they come in contact with the process of the ashes of the Paraduma, it actually renders them tamei. And this was something that Shlomo HaMelech could not really fully comprehend. And the Klei Yakar, one of the classic commentaries on the Chumash, Rabbi Ephraim Lunchitz, he brings down from the baal Akedah, the Akedah Yitzchak, that the Paraduma is, the process of Paraduma is actually a remez to Teshuvah, the process of Teshuvah. But says the Klei Yakar, let's take it one step further. And in that vein, the Paraduma is actually the perfect analogy to the process of Teshuvah. Actually, if you compare Teshuvah to someone who's ill and trying to cure himself from his illness, then the Paraduma is really the perfect analogy. Because let's say you have a guy who's sick. So he goes to the doctor, and the doctor gives him a bad medicine, a bitter tasting medicine. Now for the regular guy who's going to take the medicine, it's actually harmful. No medicine is healthy. All medicine has side effects, has harmful effects. Very often harmful effects even to the chayla. But what could the chayla do? He has to take antibiotics. It's going to ruin his digestive system. It's going to destroy all the good bacteria, all the flora in the intestinal tract. What could he do? He has a bacterial infection. He has to take antibiotic. But for a healthy person to take the medication, it's very harmful. It's disadvantageous to a person's health. So medicine is a perfect example of metaher es hatmeim and metaher es hatahirim. Medicine makes the sick better and makes the healthy sick. Well, so too says the Klei Yakar it is in the process of Teshuvah. How's that? So he tells us a story. Here's a guy, let his guard down. And the Gemara says that the person maybe put himself in a compromised situation, and he became too friendly, and then he was miyached, he went into seclusion, and then he succumbed. He succumbed to his temptation. He didn't have Avera. So how does he do Teshuvah? So the Gemara says in Masechta Yuma Daf Pei Vav Amar Beis, look at number 2. Heichi dami baal Teshuvah. What's the situation of a baal Teshuvah? Amar Rav Yehuda, Kagoin Shabbos liyadoi dvar Avera, where the Avera comes to you, where the opportunity to sin arises again. Pam Rishayna, once, Ushniya, a second time, V'nitzal imeno, and you're saved. In other words, the first time you secluded and you succumbed. In order to do Teshuvah then, you need to be in the same matzav, you need to seclude yourself, go into yichud, and overcome your temptation. Says the Gemara, Machvi Rabbi Yehuda commented, Ba'oisa isha, Ba'oisa perek, Ba'oisa makoim. The same woman, the same time, the same place. In other words, let's say a person doesn't have Avera. Do you think he could just go on Yom Kippur and say, Rebbe Hashem, I wasn't careful, I succumbed to my temptation, and that's it? You think that's a teshuvah? That's not a teshuvah. Who says you wouldn't do it again? Well, because last night you went out and you didn't have Avera. Now you're sitting in shul. No kidding, you're not going to do an Avera. What kind of teshuvah is that? So Rabbi Yehuda says the only way to do teshuvah is if the situation, the scenario repeats itself and you overcome. Ba'isai parak, ba'isai isha, ba'isai makoim. So it comes out, says the Klei Yakar, listen to this. For a tzaddik, Gamor, imagine you have a tzaddik who never did an Avera. So for him to be miyached with a woman is a disaster. It's a terrible thing. He might do an Avera. So for a tahar, going into that yichud, It's metamehim. It could cause him to slip up. Likely he's going to slip. So for a tzaddik to put himself in a compromised situation, that's an avera. It's going to be metamehim. But for the baal teshuvah, who already succumbed, the Klei Yakar says, a whopper. How's he going to do teshuvah? Somebody who already went into yichud and succumbed, what's he going to do? Guess what he has to do? He goes into the same compromised situation. He meets up with the same person. He replays the scenario, and then he overcomes his temptation. That's the only way to do teshuvah. Heichi dami baal teshuvah, ba'osai perek, ba'osai makam, ba'osai isha. So what's metame the tahirim, what a tzaddik can never do, because it would render him impure, the chayte, the sinner, the baal teshuvah, he needs to repeat the scenario. Heichi dami baal teshuvah, ba'osai isha, ba'osai perek, ba'osai makam. Says the Klei Yakar. That's the meaning of the Gemara. It's an unbelievable comment. Are you ready for this? The Gemara says in Brachos, Daf Lamed Down, number 5, Amar Rabbi Avohu, Makoim Shabale Teshuvah Oimdim Ein Tzadikim Gemurim Oimdim, right? Which is understood to mean, very Parshat, that a baal teshuvah is on a higher level than a tzaddik amor. Whatever madrega tzaddik amor reaches, okay, he grew up that way, it's easy for him, but a baal teshuvah is on a much higher level, right? Makoim Shabale Teshuvah Oimdim Ein Tzadikim Gemurim Oimdim. Says the Klei Yakar, an amazing thing. Makom Shabale Teshuvah Oimdim, the place where a baal teshuvah needs to go to. Ain't tzaddikim gemurim oimdim. A tzaddik can never go there. If a tzaddik would ever go back to that makom avera, that's it. He'd lose his tzaddik license. They would remove his tzaddik diploma. So a tzaddik can never go back to that makom avera. For a tzaddik, makom Shabale, but about teshuvah, he needs to, after he does teshuvah, after he goes to or sameach eish Torah, he goes back to the same makom avera. So you see this baal teshuvah, now he has a long beard, he's wearing a black hat, and you see, he's going into the movie theater. He's saying, what are you doing? He says, I got to do teshuvah like the Klei Yakar says. What? He buys a ticket, he goes in, he's sitting there, he's watching, and as it's about, he runs out. That's what the Klei Yakar says. At least that's what he seems to. So the tzaddik amor, he can never step foot in that place. Makom Shabale Teshuvah Oimdim. Ain't tzaddikim gemurim oimdim. The only way for the baal teshuvah. So this is the remez of the paraduma. The paraduma is metame esat tahirim, or metare esat tameim. So too, those things that tamei needs to do, a tahar can never do. The process of teshuvah is metame the tahirim, and taher the tameim. In fact, the Klei Yakar says another very interesting pshat. It's based on the pasuk in the Navi Hosea. So we're learning here Tuesday nights. We learn Navi Hosea, and the pasuk says, look at number 3. The pasuk says, "V'haya mismar b'nei Yisrael." This is in Parak Beis of Hosea. Parak Aleph, Hashem comes to Hosea, and Hashem tells Hosea, marry the Zoina and have 3 children, Yisrael, Leiruchama, Layami. And it's a whole parak of what Hosea has to do. Then Hashem tells Hosea, send them away. And then parak Beis is a parak of fortuitous prophecy. So the pasuk says, "V'haya mismar b'nei Yisrael." The count of the b'nei Yisrael, k'chol hayam, will be like the sand. Asher lo yimad, you can't measure them. V'lo yisafer, you can't count them. Now the pasuk says like this: V'haya b'mkoim asher ye'omer lahem lo ya'ami atem, and will be, instead of it being said about Klei, so you're not my people, ye'omer lahem will be said about them, b'nei kelchai, you are the sons of the living God. That's what the Navi says. That it used to be, I said about you, you're not my people, and now I'm going to say about you, you're b'nei kelchai. Says the Klei Yakar, and you find this vart in the Chida as well, in the Sefer Tzavrei Shalal. Says the Chida, says the Klei Yakar, V'haya b'makoim. You want to do teshuvah? You got to go back to the makoim where you sinned, and the Rebbe Hashem said about you, Lo yami. In that very makoim, they'll say about you, b'nei kelchai. Again, a remez to the concept b'makoim shabale teshuvah oimdim ein tzadikim gemurim oimdim. This idea that for a person to do a proper teshuvah, you need the scenario to replay itself. But more than that, what the Klei Yakar seems to be saying is that for a tzaddik to go to a makam avera is a disaster. He's not allowed to. But the baal teshuvah is sort of required to. Not only is he allowed to, he needs to replay the scenario and overcome. B'mokoim shebalei teshuvah oimdim, ein tzaddikim gemurim oimdim. Does anybody else agree with this? There's a sefer, Ezer Eliyahu. Ezer Eliyahu is written by Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen, the Baal Shevet Moser, Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen from Izmir in Turkey. He wrote many very interesting svarim, the Baal Shevet HaLevi. He wrote the Baal Shevet Moser, he wrote the Shevet Moser. He wrote a sefer called Medrash Talpiyos. He wrote a sefer Medrash Hoyitamri. Very interesting svarim. And he also writes this idea, B'makoim shabalei teshuvah oimdim ein tzaddikim gemurim micholim lamoid. That a tzaddik gomor is never allowed to go to a makom nisayon, or he might succumb. But makom shabalei teshuvah oimdim, the baal teshuvah is given a heter. Now, this is almost unbelievable. How could you say such a thing? Because, there happens to be a major misconception. When we talk about Isser Yichud, for a man to go into seclusion with a woman, a married woman, it's not an Isser D'Rabbanan. Yichud with an Eishes Ish is an Isser D'Oraisa. Yichud with a married woman is an Isser D'Oraisa. Yichud with a Pnuya, with a woman who's not married, is an Isser D'Rabbanan. Yichud with an Eishes Ish is Isser D'Oraisa. So what's the Klei Yakar saying? The Klei Yakar is saying that for the purpose of doing teshuvah, you're allowed to be mevatel an Isser D'Oraisa and be miyachid with a woman. That's what he seems to say. Makam shabalei teshuvah imdim ein tzaddikim gemurim micholim lamoid. But then he says a few other unbelievable ideas, al pi drush. The Gemara in Kedushin says that kivan sha'adam avar avera v'shana boy, hutralai. Somebody did an avera, and he repeated it, it becomes mutter. Correct the Gemara, hutralai sakadaitach, it becomes mutter. Says the Gemara, elanasis loi keheter. So we always learned this Gemara, right, 1,000,000 times. The first time you do an Avera, you feel a little guilty about it. But once you start repeating the Avera in order to live with yourself, a person doesn't have the ability to admit to themselves that, you know what, I'm doing this, and it's wrong, and I do it anyway. No human being could live like that. So once you repeat the act, the way the cognitive dissonance of it, or the way you psychologically deal with it, is you say, it's not so bad. It's only wrong a little bit. It's mutter, and then finally, ultimately you think it's a mitzvah. That's a simple pshat in the Gemara. Says the Ezer Eliyahu, says Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen. You know what it means? Kivan shenasis loy avera hutra loy. You know what that means? That once a person did an avera, and he succumbed to the temptation. So for anyone else in the world to put themselves in that matzav, it's asur. But for that person who succumbed in the past, hutra loy, it's mutter for him to go to that makom, to tempt himself again, to elicit the Yetzer Hara, and then overcome it. That's what it means. Hutra loy, nasis loy keheter. Then he says, furthermore, the Gemara says like this, Gemara Brachas Af Yotes, Tanu Bei Rabbi Shmuel, Imra Isa, Talmid Chacham, Sha'avar Avera B'Layla. You see, Talmid Chacham, he did an Avera at night. So Gemara says, Al Tehara Acharav B'Yoim. When the morning comes, don't question him, don't challenge him. Shema Asa Teshuvah. Maybe he did Teshuvah. Says the Gemara, Shema Sakadaitach. Maybe he did Teshuvah. Elavadai Asa Teshuvah. He definitely did Teshuvah. Simple meaning is, you see somebody who's a Talmid Chacham, he did something wrong. You should know by the time the morning comes, he'll have her Hurei Teshuvah and he'll regret what he did. Says Rabbi Eliyahu HaKohen, that's not what the Gemara means. If you see a Talmid Chacham doing an Avera, you see a Talmid Chacham, he's going into Yichud. You see a Talmid Chacham, he's going into the movie theaters. How could it be? You know why? The answer is he's obviously doing Teshuvah for having succumbed before, so now he's allowed to do it. That's obviously what he's doing. Now, I don't know how you explain. Let's say you see somebody mamish doing an Avera, but that's how he touches the Gemara. In other words, you see a Talmid Chacham putting himself in a compromised situation. No, he's not doing an Avera. He's Vadai, not did Teshuvah. He's doing Teshuvah. He's doing Teshuvah. That's what the Klei Yakar seems to be saying. That is what the Rabbi HaKohen seems to be saying. Chavis Havavai says, what's Teshuvah? Teshuvah is chizuk ba'avodas Hashem b'makom shehisrashal. Strengthening yourself after being weak. Who does that apply to? Everybody, right? Everybody needs chizuk after hisrashos. Okay, Rabbi say, I don't know about you, but when I saw this idea of the Klei Yakar and the Israelio, this sounded completely antithetical to everything that I always understood. You're going to tell me that about Teshuvah, after he put himself in a compromised situation, he should go back to the place in order to relive the experience and overcome? Does that make any sense? The Gemara says so many times, right? A person's not to challenge themselves. We daven every morning. We ask Rebbe, don't challenge me. What do you mean don't challenge me? Well, what's life all about? The answer is, like the Vilna Gaon told the Dubna Magid. Dubna Magid, the story goes, the Vilna Gaon asked for Musar. So Dubna Magid says, the Gaon, what kind of Musar can I give you? The Vilna Gaon says, please give me Musar. So Dubna Magid said, okay. You, Vilna Gaon, you're such a big tzaddik. Big deal you're a big tzaddik. Of course you're a tzaddik. You sit in your Daled Amos and you learn Torah all day long. Of course you're a tzaddik. Why? How would you be able to do an Avera? But somebody goes out into the world, into the real world, and doesn't sin, that's a tzaddik. So, supposedly, the Vilna Gaon broke down crying, and after that he comes back to the Magid. He said, look, I'm not a groiser kunstmacher, but who said you have to be a kunstmacher? Who said in this world you need to do some kind of glamorous thing? The purpose is avoid the test in the first place. That's the yesod of avodas Hashem. Don't put yourself in the situation. You're going to put yourself in the situation? No. You're going to walk down the street and not look? You're not going to do that. Right? The Gemara says, in a situation where there are something inappropriate, if you go there and you don't look, you're a Rasha, the Gemara says. Don't go there. You're not allowed to go there. Avoid the temptation. Says Reb Tzaddik HaKohen. Reb Tzaddik HaKohen writes in the Takanas HaShavim. Reb Tzaddik HaKohen wrote a sefer, Takanas HaShavim, and he writes in Siman Tes, Ois Hey. By the way, I just point out to you, there's a sefer, Leket Yosher. The Leket Yosher was reports of the minhagim of the Baal Shumas Hadeshin, Rabbi Yisrael Isserlin, one of the great Rishonim. And he writes, about this Gemara, that Heichi Dami Baal Teshuvah, Ba'osai Perek, Ba'osai Makim, U'Ba'osai Isha. He writes, Shamati, I heard, and he says, Lo Yadati Mi, I don't know from who I heard it, that She'echad Ratza Lasois, somebody wanted to do that. Guess what? V'asa Avera Shenis. He did Avera the second time. Somebody tried it. In other words, they went back to Oisai Makim, Oisai Isha, Oisai Perek, and guess what? They did Oisai Avera. No kidding. That's what happens. But the Reb Tzaddik HaKohen spells out very clearly. Reb Tzaddik HaKohen writes that when the Gemara says, Heichi Dami Baal Teshuvah, Kigoin, Kigoin means the following. It doesn't mean you have to replay the Maisa and overcome it. Kigoin means where in your heart you reach the Madrega, that if it would occur again, you would be able to overcome it. But not that you have to actually have it occur again. It doesn't have to replay itself. It means the Yoidea Talumos, that the Rebbe knows secrets, could look into your heart and determine that you've reached a level that if it were to happen again, you would be able to overcome. In fact, Reb Tzaddik HaKohen says an amazing thing. Let's say a person, after they did the Avera, has Charata Gemura, and they reached the level that if it were to replay itself again, they would not do it again. And then an hour later, the situation replays itself, and they sin. The teshuvah that you did before is a teshuvah gemura. You reached the level that if it were to happen again at that moment, you would have never done it again. The first Avera is wiped out. Happens to be you slipped again. Now you have to do teshuvah again. But it doesn't demonstrate that your teshuvah was not good. Says Reb Tzaddik HaKohen, the Maisa does not need to replay itself. And to say that you need to put yourself in the situation, I'll read to you the words of Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen. He says, "V'chisaka daitach" on the second sheet. Dehuter iser yichud l'baal teshuvah. All of a sudden, an iser of yichud is mutter for baal teshuvah. He says, "Elamai," you'll say it doesn't mean you should go into yichud, but if you would happen to find yourself in a situation of yichud, you need to overcome. He said, "What are you talking about overcome? If you find yourself in an iser of yichud, you need to run out of the room as fast as possible." Right? What would the halacha be? You realize you're in the house, have a babysitter. By the way, very important to know, it's kedai to give this year. If a person has a cleaning lady or a babysitter at home, cannot be in the house just you and the person. It's isser of yichud. So what do? So if you live in a house, you need to have the front door open. What do I mean open? At least slightly ajar. At least slightly ajar. Otherwise, it's an isser of yichud. In fact, we're going to see in the times of Noda B'Yehuda, they made a takana gemura that Jewish people cannot have assistance in the house of a married woman, unless for a baby, unless for a wet nurse. But they made a takana gemura, and the Noda B'Yehuda writes with the strongest terms. He says that anybody who violates the words of the Rabbanon about this takana, so you're not going to listen to us? He writes very scary things, very frightening things. He says like this. We're going to come to the words of the Noda B'Yehuda soon. Says Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that So if a person were to find themselves in a compromise, so let's say a person didn't realize, your wife left the house. Now certain kids could be a shomer. Children could be a shomer. You have to know the halachas. At what age could a child be a shomer? But let's say a person happens to find themselves, they're home, there's assistance in the house. What do? Oh, I'm going to get up in a few minutes and get up. You need to jump as fast as you can to the front door and open it. You have to be boireach. In fact, the Vilna Gaon one time was in a situation, jumped out the window. I'm not here to tell you to jump out the window, but you got to move quick. You have to, for whatever time you can't do it, you're an oinus. But beyond that, a person has to try as quickly as possible to rectify the matzah. But in any event, the Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen quotes from many sources. Gemara in Sanhedrin says, "Lo olam lo yavei atzmei l'nisayon." He brings from the Sefer Chasidim, "Lo yoymar adam harei ani ba'oisa ma'isa." No, a person cannot put themselves in that situation. However, says Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen, I must admit that many years ago I saw a Sefer Rav Yeva, and in his commentary to Tehillim, he quotes from the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov writes that he heard from a Sifta Durakia that in order for a person to do Teshuvah, you need to replay the situation. You need to replay the scenario. You need to go back to the place, to the person, to the same situation, and overcome. And with this, they explain, B'makom shabalei teshuvah oimdim ein tzaddikim oimdim. Says Reb Tzaddik, and I even saw and I heard from the Klei Yakar and Parshat Chukat, who explains that this is the dichotomy, the paradox of the Parah Aduma, that the Baal Teshuvah needs to be metame himself in a way that the tzaddik cannot. Says Reb Tzaddik HaKohen, what do I have to say about these comments of the Baal Shem Tov and the Klei Yakar? He said, look, I don't have the books in front of me. You can't say such a thing. I don't care who says it, you can't say it. Maybe it's a misquote, maybe it's a misprint, maybe somebody misunderstood. It's not true. Maybe, what do they mean? Maybe they meant b'derech heter. That means like this. Let's say somebody was once very hungry, and they were passing by McDonald's. They couldn't help themselves, they went in. So according to this so-called statement of the Baal Shem Tov, they would have to make themselves very hungry, drive by McDonald's, and not go in. To which the Rav Tzaddik HaKohen is saying, no, chas v'shalom, to say that a person should tempt themselves again. Maybe what the Klei Yakar means is as follows. That if a person succumbed to McDonald's, you know what they should do? They should make themselves very hungry and drive by kosher delight, olav hashalom. Right? And not go in. This way, worse comes to worse. If they succumb, they're only spending $10 on a burger. What's not the end of the world. They ate a kosher burger. But to put yourself in a matzav where you may be tempting yourself to do an avera, you're not allowed to do that. For example, we find the Gemara says about David HaMelech. David HaMelech had 10 pilagshim. He would tell them to dress up and make themselves very alluring. And then David HaMelech would overcome. That's mutter, because David had a relationship with them. They were his pilagesh. They were almost married to him. It was mutter for him. So to overcome b'makom heter, maybe that's what the Klei Yakar was talking about. But to tempt yourself to do an avera, of course you can't do that. But says the tzaddik HaKohen, in my opinion, it's not going to work. You know why? Because you think because you overcame kosher delight, you're not going to go into McDonald's. Says the tzaddik HaKohen, there's no temptation for kosher food. There's no temptation for a pilagesh. All taiva is for dvarim asurim, because mayim genuvim yimtaku. You think you're a big gibar. You think you have tremendous self-discipline because you're not going to eat something kosher. Nobody really wants something kosher. If you're hungry, you eat it, but there's no taiva for it. There's no taiva for the pilagesh. So it's not even going to help. It's not even going to help. Noid Behuda says the same thing. Says in Noid Behuda in the Drushe Hatzlach, he writes in his first drush, he writes, many people are in error, many people mistakenly interpret the statement of Rabbi Behuda of Oisei Makom, Oisei Isha, Oisei Perek, that you need to go and put yourself in that situation and overcome. Says the Noid Behuda, Ani Oimer Chas V'Shalom Loimar Kain. Heaven forbid to say such a thing. He says, even a tzaddik gomor is not to tempt himself. Certainly a baal teshuvah who already succumbed the first time certainly cannot put himself into that matzav. To say that you're allowed to violate the Isser of Yichud, no, the Yehuda spells out very clearly. Yichud with a married woman is an Isser d'oraisa. The Chachamim hoisifu, Yichud with a pnuya. By the way, the Yehuda writes historically. He writes a few years ago, all the Rabbanim got together and they made a gezerah. And they made a gzeira that a Jew cannot have an Eishes Ish b'veisai as a misharesas. But unfortunately, it fell by the wayside. Says Noid Behuda, you should know that sometimes people hear Rabbanim say things and they say, big deal. They're bored. They're looking for to say a shocker this way to get people to think about something. Says Noid Behuda, you should know. In the olden days, biyamim kadmoinim, kol ha'over al divrei chachamim, chayiv misa. He says, I want you to know about something. I mean, these are like his off-the-record drushas. He said, remember a few years ago we made a gzeira that nobody's allowed to wear colored shoes? So some Jews, they said to themselves, well, the colored shoes that we had before the rabbis made the gzeira, they're grandfathered in. So we can, says Noid Behuda, many years have passed. There are no more of those grandfathered in colored shoes. He says you should know that if people are going to continue wearing colored shoes, then they may have to take off their shoes for 7 days. If you're not going to wear the right shoes, he says very frightening things. And then he says like this, bottom line is, chas v'shalom to say that a person should put themselves in that matzav. When Chazal say kegoin shabas ma'isa liyadai, they don't say tavi ma'isa liyadai. It means if it so happened to come one's way. But chas v'shalom to put yourself in that matzav. Now, what I'm getting at today is really one of the main parts that I wanted to speak about. And that is, if you have a question in the proper approach for Teshuvah, the primary source on the derech of Teshuvah is the Sefer Shari Teshuvah of Rabbeinu Yonah. Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerona, Spain. He was born in 1180 in Gerona. Passed away in 1263 in Toledo, Spain. Rabbeinu Yonah wrote the Sefer Shari Teshuvah, and we're going to discuss, we don't have so much time, but we're going to try to discuss in detail exactly the historical background of the Sefer Shari Teshuvah. And Rabbeinu Yonah writes that Teshuvah is like doing laundry. Right? Let's say you want to do laundry. So you go to a kiddush on Shabbos, and somebody spills cholent on your shirt. Yeah? Or let's say you come to a shir Thursday and someone's supposed to show on your shir. So what do? You brush it off. So you got off 99% of it. But you still have a stain. So you go home, you take a shmata, you clean it off. It's okay. You're not wearing it to a wedding. So what do? You take some hot water, you're still not wearing. What do you need? You need bleach, you need detergent, says Rabbi, same thing with teshuvah. There's basic teshuvah, but if you want to purify the neshama completely pure, he writes 20 different ingredients to do teshuvah. Ingredient number 19, look at number 12 on your sheet. Azivas chetoi behizdamein v'hu b'toykef tavasai. Leaving the sin when you're at the peak of your taiva. In other words, here's a guy, he sinned when he was 20, he's 25, 30, and then when he's 99 years old, he's lying there, he can barely move, and he says, Ribono Shel Olam, I'm never going to do it again. Yeah, no kidding, you're never going to do it again. That's not teshuvah. It's teshuvah, but it's not teshuvah gemura. The Gemara says, Ashrei yish, Ashrei mi sha'asa teshuvah ba'oido yish. When you still are at peak strength. Rabbeinu Yonah says very carefully, very, very clearly, B'hizdamein, if it happens to come your way. He writes like this, Kasher nivchan v'yotza naki, when a person is tested and he leaves clean, ba'oisoi perak, uva'oisoi makom, uva'oisoi isha, ritzoinam loimar, ki hizdamein hachet liyadai. If the chet happens to come your way. He doesn't say ingredient number 19 is go back to the place, repeat the scenario, tempt yourself, and then overcome. He says very clearly, hizdamein hachet liyadai. So therefore, really, it's impossible to say the simple meaning of the Klei Yakar and the Ezer Eliyahu that a person should dafka go out of his way. There's an old Torah journal called Kovetz Oitzros Yerushalayim, and in the 22nd edition, he struggles to explain what did the Klei Yakar mean. The Klei Yakar cannot have forgotten about the fact that yichud is aser, and yichud would never be mutter even for the baal teshuvah. So he sort of struggles to explain that what the Klei Yakar means is, of course you can't put yourself in the situation in the first instance where you're going to go back to the place. What the Klei Yakar means is, here you have a guy who did the Aveira, and he's still a baal Aveira. And he goes back to the place. If when he's there, he says, you know what? I really need to do teshuvah, I need to overcome, I need to conquer my yetzer. If at that moment he overcomes, and he will have to overcome at that moment, otherwise he'll never be able to do the teshuvah for now, because he's here, so now's the test, then he has to be matayr, himself in the makom tameh. In the place where the tzaddik could never go, he went. Why? Because he planned on doing the Aveira, he must overcome it. That's all the Klei Yakar means. But the Klei Yakar doesn't mean you need to go there in the first instance. Doesn't seem to say that exactly. But the words of the Klei Yakar, mitzvah liyashma, it's really very difficult to take the Klei Yakar at face value.